All right, welcome in. Divisional weekend is here. 24 teams down. There are 8 teams left standing. In the AFC, it's the Titans, it's the Steelers, it's the Patriots, and it's the Jaguars. In the NFC, it's the Eagles, the Falcons, the Saints, and the Vikings. And, of course, there are still 4 head coaching openings out there. 2 have been filled now. The Raiders will introduce John Gruden a little later today. The Bears will introduce Matt Nagy a little later today. I'm open to answering all of your questions there on Periscope here in a little bit after we get through all of the news, but a lot going on, and maybe the best football weekend of the year on deck. That divisional weekend is fantastic. We get on Saturday at 4 o'clock the Eagles and the Saints. First time ever, I believe, that the Eagles and the Falcons. First time ever, I believe, that a 6 seed has been favored over a 1 seed in the divisional round. Then we get on Saturday night the Patriots and the Titans. On Sunday afternoon, the early game, the Jaguars and the Steelers, and the late game, the Saints and the Vikings. Should be a fantastic weekend. So we're going to do what we always do here on the YouTube version of our podcast, the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer. We're going to go through 5 news items. Then I'm going to take all of your questions on Periscope, and we'll get out of here. We're going to start with maybe the big story over the weekend, which was what happened in New England, where New England stands going into the divisional round. I'm going to start with a look back and why the important piece of the story that you want to focus on from Seth Wickersham and ESPN and the important piece of the reaction to that story from the Patriots, it's all about the Jimmy Garoppolo trade. There's a lot of window dressing there. There's a lot of other things that have gone on. It hasn't been a comfortable place to work for a lot of people this year. I'm just telling you that the focus of where you should be focused, what you should be looking at here, is the Jimmy Garoppolo trade. Okay, one of the reasons why it's important is there are 2 hallmarks of Bill Belichick's 18 years in New England that were broken over the course of the last 5 months with the Patriots' handling of the quarterback position. Okay? Number 1, Bill Belichick always says he does what's best for the team. He's been the most pragmatic person imaginable when it comes to that. I do what's best for the football team. Okay, so let's say he knew the sand in the hourglass was running out on Jimmy Garoppolo, and he knew that he was going to have to trade Jimmy Garoppolo on October 30th. Say he knew that in July or August. There is no way on God's green earth that he would give away Jacoby Brissett for the Colts' bust of a former first-round receiver, Philip Dorsett, who, by the way, has done almost nothing for New England. Okay, so that's number 1. If you knew you were trading Garoppolo, or at the very least you knew that a decision was coming at the position and that you may have to make that decision at the end of October, you would not give away a quarterback that you spent a 3rd-round pick on 16 months earlier, a quarterback that you spent 16 months developing, and a quarterback you had for less than $1 million a year in an environment where backup quarterbacks can cost $6 or $7 million a year. So that part of it doesn't add up. If there was this plan that they were going to trade Garoppolo during the season, there is no way they are handing Jacoby Brissett over to the Indianapolis Colts on September 2nd. So that's number 1. Number 2, one thing Bill's always done, he's always been able to maximize assets. We've seen it in the way he's built draft capital over the years. We've seen it in the way that he's moved veterans over the years. He's a master of maximizing assets. And he didn't maximize the asset here. And it looks intentional. Okay, Jimmy Garoppolo in the spring probably would have gotten Bill a 1st-round pick plus something else. Maybe 2 1st-round picks. Okay, the reason why is because, A, the veteran market wasn't very good. Mike Glennon was the top guy there. B, the draft class wasn't considered great at the time. Now, it may look a little bit better now, but at the time, Mitch Trubisky was the top guy there. It was considered the weakest draft class probably in 4 years since the 2013 class where E.J. Manuel was the first guy. And so that created demand. And you had so many teams out there and so many teams that wouldn't be part of the market a few months later. Houston, they hadn't drafted Deshaun Watson at that point. New Orleans, they had Drew Brees going into a contract year. They didn't know where they were at as a team at that point. And Sean Payton loved Jimmy Garoppolo coming out of Eastern Illinois. Chicago, they wind up drafting Mitch Trubisky. There are all these teams that had a need for quarterback at the time. So you had a long list of suitors back then, and that list dwindles down. You obviously don't have the same conditions when you get to the fall. And so by not trading him in the spring, you weren't maximizing the asset. You also weren't maximizing the asset by not waiting until after the year. It was a bad time to trade him. And on top of that, you didn't call around. To my knowledge, the Niners are the only team he called, that Bill called. And that deal was done very, very quickly. Like he just wanted to move on from the player. Which, when you know what he thinks of Jimmy Garoppolo, doesn't make any sense. So it looks, at least on the surface, like he wanted to put Jimmy Garoppolo in a place to succeed. He views Jimmy Garoppolo as part of his legacy, and he wants to be able to hold Jimmy Garoppolo up and say, "Hey, look, right here, this is what you had, and this is what you maybe get rid of." So that's why it doesn't add up. Okay, that's why it feels like, and I believe that Bill knew they weren't going to let him trade Tom Brady. I don't know that he was forced to make a deal, but I know he did, and I know those two elements of it, doing what's best for the team and maximizing assets, weren't in place in his handling of the quarterback position over the last 6 months. Very out of character, and that tells you things were going on that influenced the trade. Okay, now why is this a big deal? Well, the Patriots' strong response here is because this is a third-rail topic for everyone involved. This is a third-rail topic for Robert Kraft, because this is how he lost the second-best coach in franchise history. This is how he lost Bill Parcells. It was over Terry Glenn in 1996. Winds up losing him in 97. And so Robert Kraft knows this is a very, very sensitive thing with football coaches. And this particular football coach was there for that. There's one thing Belichick doesn't have time for. It's ownership messing with football decisions. And so this is worth watching going forward. Now, what does it mean for the playoffs? Nothing. I think the Patriots rally like they always do. I don't know if they're good enough to win a Super Bowl, but I don't think it's going to affect their effort. I don't think it's going to affect their preparation. I don't think it's going to affect the way Brady plays. In fact, it might help. I don't think it's going to affect them. I think they still are the prohibitive favorite going into the playoffs. But what it could do is it could ultimately wind up accelerating Belichick's departure. Here's why. You've got three parties involved. Kraft's not going anywhere. With Garoppolo gone, Brady's not going anywhere. And that leaves Belichick as the wild card. And just tell you this, like I've heard for 6 or 7 years that Bill wanted one of his goals was to bridge the Patriots into the next era, go from the Brady era to the era whoever the next quarterback's going to be. And now with that sort of off the table, or at least having to start it all over again, you can certainly see why he'd be out of there quicker. Okay, number 2. We're going to go to Belichick's best friend now, Nick Saban, and why I believe that if I'm one of that these 4 teams that are in the midst of their coaching searches need to at least place a phone call. They need to at least see that Nick Saban isn't interested. They need to hear it for themselves. Okay? Now, this obviously, Nick wasn't great. I believe 15-17 in his 2 years in Miami. But this revisionist history that he was bad is ridiculous. Okay? Took over a 4-12 team. That 4-12 team was toxic. They fired a coach in midseason the year before. He cleaned out the roster. They went 3-7, and then they ripped off 6 straight wins at the end of that year behind Gus Frerotte as their quarterback. They were 9-7. They just missed the playoffs. They were seen across the NFL as a rising team. So then they got a decision to make a quarterback. And we all know how that went down. They picked Dante Culpepper over Drew Brees. The rest is history. But I'll tell you this, before we knew what Dante Culpepper was going to be, before we knew what Drew Brees was going to be coming off the shoulder, there were a lot of people who thought that the Dolphins were going to the Super Bowl in 2006. That's how much progress he made in year 1. That's the sort of foundation that Nick Saban built in Miami in year 1. And I talked to a couple players earlier in the year who played for Nick there, and they all believe, or at least it seems to me, like he was on the way to doing something special. Here's what Kevin Carter, who was a well-respected veteran in the NFL for a long time, won a Super Bowl with the Rams, said if he'd signed Breeze, I think we'd have been in playoffs consistently and battling with the Patriots for the top of the AFC East. If Breeze came to Miami, he's still the quarterback there, and you might have a championship team over that time. Look, I just think that this is a bad quarterback decision, led to a miserable year, led to a little bit of family pressure that helped push him out the door in Miami and push him back towards Alabama. It's well documented. His wife wanted to go back to the lifestyle of being in a college town. And what gave her the opening to push for it, of course, was the fact that things didn't go well in year two and that the Alabama job was open. But Nick wasn't bad as an NFL coach. And as a program builder over the last 11 years, he's proven himself to be beyond reproach. He's a leader. He knows how to build a program. He knows how to set it up. And I'll tell you what, we all get obsessed with how this coach develops that quarterback or how this coach develops that scheme. Program building and leading people are more important than those things. It's the most important part of being a head coach. And Nick Saban has that in spades. With a lot of the guys, and I like a lot of the guys that are going to get jobs over the next few weeks, you're projecting. With Nick Saban, you're not projecting with the most important parts of it. Now, he'd have to have a quarterback, but that's every coach, right? Bill Belichick without Tom Brady, well, we saw that in Cleveland. It's not specific to Saban, it's everyone. You either have a coach or you're screwed. You're up a river. So if I'm one of these teams, I call Nick Saban because I think he's got the most important. And now, it's going to cost a lot of money. That's fine. Coaches are as important as quarterbacks. Almost. It might not be a long-term solution because he's going to be 67. That's fine too. I'm fine with that. Because you can make something work down the line. I'm taking a stab at Nick Saban if I'm one of these teams. That's just me. And what we saw last night was another example of it. I mean, they've got the qualities the Patriots do, which is they don't mess it up. They play disciplined. They play smart. They wait for the other team to trip over itself, which again happened last night. And, man, does he have good feel. And I think the move to go to Tua at halftime shows that again. Not many coaches would have the set to pull that off. Not many coaches would have the instinct to pull that off. But Nick Saban has that. Okay, number 3. Let's get into the games this weekend. One of the things that I think was most fascinating about last weekend and why I've picked New Orleans to go to the Super Bowl, why I think the Saints are such a good bet to get there, or are a good bet to get there, not such a good bet to get there, is because all year they've had elements that have not a ton to do with Drew Brees. I think Drew Brees has the best combination of run game and defense he's ever had. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that he can throw for 200 yards in a game and they can win. And I've said this over and over and over again. It creates a different environment for a quarterback, especially a guy who will be turning 39 in a week. Here's what I loved about their win against the Panthers, though. When they need Brees to be great, he can still be great. And that is such an enormous advantage to have. If you can run the ball like the Saints have run the ball over the course of the year behind Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, if you can play defense the way that they've played defense over the course of this year, and with the rookies they've had in Marshawn Lattimore and Marcus Williams, and a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Cam Jordan, and then Drew Brees isn't your whole hand anymore. Drew Brees is just your trump card. It's a gigantic advantage. And we've seen it with other teams too. I mean, look, New England's been at their best when Brady has that around him. Peyton Manning in Indianapolis, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. When it becomes too much about the quarterback, those quarterbacks wind up a lot of times being up to the challenge and playing great, but they don't have as great a chance to win. And so what was so fascinating about the game against the Panthers on Sunday was how the Saints were able to pull that trump card, and it worked. Okay? The Saints were held to 41 yards on 22 carries. Now, to put that in context, in their 2 wins over the Panthers, they had earlier in the year, they had 148 and 149 yards rushing. That's against a defense that didn't give up 120 to any other team. 41 yards on 22 carries. So the Panthers did a much better job. You could say on paper 3 or 4 times the job they did during the regular season, stopping Kamara, Ingram, and the Saints' run game. And the defense was just up and down. The defense played well in forcing field goals, but Cam Newton threw for 349 yards. The Panthers rushed for 107 yards. And when they needed him, Drew Brees was nails. 23 of 33, 376 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And so I like the Saints to go into Minnesota and win this weekend, because I think that they are capable of playing a more well-rounded game than they have at any point during Drew Brees' 12 years as a Saint. All right, number 4. And this, again, is going to be looking at a spot outside of the quarterback position, outside of the glamour areas of a team. The Falcons intrigue me too. And it's weird that, we could see 2 teams coming, and I don't remember the last time this happened, but 2 teams coming out of Wild Card Weekend playing for a conference championship. But I think it's on the table, with the Saints possibly beating the Vikings in Minnesota and the Falcons going into Philadelphia. And to be fair, winning a game against an Eagles team that isn't being led by the guy who was an MVP candidate in Carson Wentz. So here's why I think the Falcons are in good shape. Because their defense is so much better than it was last year. They're top 10 in scoring defense. They were low 20s in that category last year. They're top 20 in total defense. They were low 20s in that category last year. They held the Rams, who were the highest scoring offense in football, to 13 points. They made plays when they had to. Todd Gurley had 101 yards, but 33 of those came on 1 carry. Jared Goff was a smidge over 50% passing. Outside of a 38-yarder to Robert Woods, they kept the Rams' passing game in front of them. They looked fast. They got to Jared Goff. Takk McKinley looks like he's going to be a star. And their corners look great. Alfred and Trufant, I thought, were the stars of the game. And so what's so interesting about the Falcons is we've all been focused on the switch from Kyle Shanahan to Sark, and how that's kind of taken them from one level to a lower level on offense, but they may be more well-rounded going into this year's. They may have been more well-rounded going into this year's playoffs, and that showed. And Ryan played well against the Rams defense that's pretty good. So look for the Falcons to potentially beat the Eagles in Philadelphia on Saturday afternoon. And number 5, one of the main things that I'm going to be watching over the weekend is how Marcus Mariota plays. He did not look good in the first half of that game against Kansas City in Arrowhead. And this has sort of been a theme with him. Now, he didn't regress to the level that Derek Carr did in Oakland this year, but he did take a step back. There's no question about that. And it showed again in the first half of the game against Kansas City. 7 of 13, 82 yards and an interception. I'll tell you what, something happened in the second half. And I don't know what that something is. Maybe he had a little bit more control of it. Maybe they were moving a little bit faster, and that got him into more of a rhythm. Remember, he played in the blur offense at Oregon in college. Whatever it was, 12 of 18, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Now he goes to Foxborough against a defense that is well coached but flawed. So this is a big moment for Marcus Mariota on Saturday night. This is a big moment for the coaching staff. Because when they were looking at the idea of moving on from Mike Mularkey, maybe the main reason was because of the development of Marcus Mariota and where that was at. In fact, the main reason why Mike Mularkey got that job in the first place was because under Ken Wisenhunt, Mariota got the crap knocked out of him, and Mularkey had worked to fix that problem, and Mularkey promised that he would be invested in making sure they got the most out of the quarterback. So they invested in the offensive line. They drafted Jack Conklin with John Robinson's first pick, the general manager's first pick. And so they felt like they fixed that problem. But now he's got to keep taking steps forward. And so when the Titans hired Mike Mularkey, it was about doing right by the asset being Mariota. It was about doing right by the asset and investing back into the asset. And now, I think we're going to see a lot as far as where the program is. Can they build on that second half? Because I think Mariota's got the big game chops to go in and play well. I don't think he's going to be spooked by what he sees in Foxborough, but it's going to say a lot about his development because he's going up against a good coaching staff, a well-coached defense, and I think he's going to I look at the second half, the way he played in that second half, and he was fantastic. And it goes beyond the touchdown pass to himself. It goes beyond the game-winning block on the Derrick Henry run. He was confident. He was playing fast. And so I'm really interested to see if we see more of that. Because if we don't, and they feel bad about where the development of the quarterback is, remember, Josh McDaniels might still be available after we get out of this weekend. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Okay, I'm going to answer all your questions now. There's still I think we were up at 700 earlier. There are about 360 of you guys here. I'm going to answer your questions for about 5 minutes. Let's go. Does the world implode if the Titans end the Patriots dynasty? I do not think the world will implode. I do think that Bill Belichick and Tom Brady will both be back in New England in 2018, so I don't think it'll be an end to the dynasty, but certainly it's going to be more difficult on those guys next year because of the likelihood they're going to lose both coordinators. What's going on in Detroit with the Lions coaching search? My feeling, and somebody just asked Patricia to Detroit, my feeling is that it's going to be Matt Patricia. I believe that they're going to keep Jim Bob Cooter on staff as the offensive coordinator. I know they had those guys meet. So my feeling is that is still Matt Patricia's job to lose. Mike Vrabel would be number 2. Colts, McDaniels' chances, I think that is the focus of their coaching search. One thing I have learned the last couple of days is that there has been some relationship building between Ballard and McDaniels. I also thought it was interesting in that Patriots story last week that there was that little nugget there about Chris Ballard building the relationship back up with the Patriots, building a relationship with Bill Belichick over the course of last summer. That to me was really interesting I think he may have already had his eyes on Josh at that point. Where we got here? Score for the Vikings-Saints game. I'd just be throwing a dart right now, but let's say Saints 23, Vikings 20. How's that sound? Is there a QB the Pats can draft in the second round that will give hope for the future? At that point, Allen will be gone, Darnold will be gone, Rosen will be gone, Mayfield will be gone. Mason Rudolph might be somebody you want to watch. Do you think the inexperience affected the Rams? Yeah, I think it did to some degree. But, it's just early on with the fumbles, obviously with Pharaoh Cooper, you could certainly make that case. McDaniels, DC, or OC options. I'm going to write about that this week, I think. But I would keep an eye on Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator or the linebackers coach in Dallas, and Brian Daboll, potentially the offensive coordinator in Alabama. Rams need more Gurley. Yeah, he only got 14 carries, so sure you can make that case. Who could be Patricia's DC in Detroit? I'm not as sure about that. Again, I think Jim Bob Cooter sticks as the offensive coordinator there. Thoughts on the Jags' chances at the Steelers? The Jaguars need to create points on defense. That's my belief. Watkins back in LA next season. It's a fair question. It's going to be tough to franchise him based on what the number is. Antonio Brown playing this weekend. That is the plan. We've seen Steeler players go into games hurt before and play through it. We've seen players not get through it. It'll be interesting to watch that. Thoughts on Elliott Wolf to Cleveland? I think Elliott Wolf will likely be on the move. I wrote about a month ago about the potential of Gettleman being the number 1 and Wolf being the number 2 in New York. I don't think that's impossible, but Cleveland or Oakland, I think those would be the 2 possibilities for Elliott Wolf right now. Has Luck thrown yet? I know the plan was to get him in a throwing program in January. I'm not sure if that started or not. Is Alex Smith done in Kansas City? I believe, I believe he will be done in Kansas City. 2 things play into that. 1, Pat Mahomes is way ahead of schedule. 2, this is the last opportunity for the Chiefs to get value back for Alex Smith. He's in a contract year, so next year if they held on to him, it would be a matter of him just walking. Tavon Austin gone too soon, 2 snaps in the wild card game. Tavon Austin's still sort of a gadget player. Jimmy G, I don't know why you're asking me about Jimmy G without any question on there, but yeah, Jimmy G's awesome. Josh Gordon's home in 2018. I believe it'll be Cleveland. Thoughts on Kirk Cousins? I think Kirk Cousins, if I had to guess right now, and this is a guess, if I had to guess right now, I think Kirk Cousins makes it to the market because, like Jay Gruden said, the Redskins are a little tired of going year to year with him. And if you put the tag on him, there's zero chance he does a long-term deal. That's at $35 million. You're saying you're going to cost yourself that on the cap this year, and then you're basically saying we're going to be doing this all over again in 2019. If they want to do a long-term deal, my feeling is the only way to do it is either put the transition tag on him or let him hit the market. Letting him hit the market, of course, would define his value better. Does the Jets trade up for a quarterback? Do the Jets trade up for a quarterback or trade down for more picks? I think they look at all options at quarterback. I don't think going and making a run at a Kirk Cousins is out of the question. Do the Packers go into rebuilding mode next season? No, not as long as our Aaron Rodgers is there, especially at 34 years old. Who will the Bills quarterback be next year? They're another possibility for a Kirk Cousins. They're drafting, I believe, 21st and 22nd overall. So, if you're looking at one in the draft, it's either a trade up or, which you could do with those two picks, or it's hoping that a Mayfield or an Allen falls to you. Seahawks rebuild season. 5 players matter in Seattle. 5 players to watch in Seattle right now. Number 1, Michael Bennett is going to be 33 years old next season. What do you do with him? 2 more, Cam Chancellor, Cliff Averill. What's their futures? They have neck injuries that may prevent them from playing football. And then 2 more, that makes 5. Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman heading into contract years in 2018. What do you do with them? If those 5 guys are gone, obviously they're blowing it up and building around Russell Wilson on offense and probably Bobby Wagner on defense. Matt Patricia to the Lions, we already talked about that. I believe he will wind up in Detroit. I also will say that I think both Josh and Patricia are legitimate candidates for the New York job. I think the Giants are considering both of them, and I think my feeling at least is that if either of those guys got offered the Giants job, I think either of those guys would take the Giants job. Richard Sherman returned back to his hometown of L.A. and play for the Rams. It could be interesting. They stand to lose Tremaine Johnson, so Sherman could be an answer. They do look for the longer types of corners there in Wade Phillips' defense. Tom Brady plays until 2020. I believe that he will outlast Bill Belichick in New England now, and I probably wouldn't have said that a couple years ago. Maybe even over the summer I wouldn't have said that. Does Martavis Bryant stay in Pittsburgh next season? I think so, yes. I think so, but I haven't checked on that. Let's do 5 more questions. There's still 350 of you here. Teams that rise and fall the most next year. I think the easy team as a riser would be the San Francisco 49ers. They look great down the stretch with Jimmy Garoppolo. Remember, they were 5-29, I believe, in their previous 34 games. 5-0 with Jimmy Garoppolo as their starter. They also have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds and $100 million to spend. The Niners are in really, really good shape. As for a faller, let's hold off on that. Ask me again next week. Number 2, do the Bills make the playoffs next year? It certainly could be one of those situations like the Dolphins where you take a step forward in year 1, take a step back in year 2. They have made major strides this year and obviously have a lot of draft capital, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. They're in great shape moving forward. It's tough to do it consistently, so I'm hard-pressed to say, yes, lock, stock, and barrel, they're going to be in the playoffs next year, especially because they're in the same division as New England, but I do think the Bills are in good shape. Let's go question number 3. I may have already answered number 3. This is 3 or 4. I'll say 3. Marty Hurney, you asked me about Marty Hurney. I know what he came out and said. I've heard over the course of the last 2 months that Marty Hurney wants to keep the job full-time, that it's no secret in that building that he wants the job full-time. And I think with the team being where it is right now and on the verge of selling, and the hope is that a sale gets done before the beginning of next year. If they get an expedited timetable, I suppose that's possible. Certainly it makes sense to keep the status quo so the new owner, whoever it is, can make decisions on those people after the 2018 season. Final question of the week. Future quarterback of the Vikings. Let's close it there because I think it's a really interesting one. They do not have any quarterbacks under contract for 2018. That is a bad spot to be in. It's a good problem to have because obviously they've gotten good production out of that position in the last 2 years in the wake of Teddy Bridgewater's injury. But it's tough to build and look at, it's tough to build going forward, not knowing who your quarterback's going to be. I will say this, that in the conversation I had with Rick Spielman over the course of the summer, he mentioned that the plan was to use the The plan was to use the franchise tag on a quarterback. That quarterback right now, at least on paper, would seem to be Case Keenum. What happens with Teddy Bridgewater, I think, is an open question. But if you use the franchise tag on Case Keenum, are you telling Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater, this guy is our starter, and if you come back here, it's as a backup? That's what's tricky about this situation. And so it's a difficult situation, but because they have the franchise tag and because they have the cap space to use it and because it's been part of their long-term planning, my feeling is they'll be okay at quarterback in 2018. The question is what their future is at the position beyond that, which is something I'm sure that they're going to be sorting out. And do they bring back Teddy Bridgewater, who they invested a first-round pick in? Do they bring back Sam Bradford, who they invested a first-round pick in? Or do they have to turn around and then in April look at spending another first-round pick on another quarterback? It's a tricky situation, but a good problem to have because the Vikings are a bye team, one of the best teams in football, one of the best defenses in football. A fixed offensive line. They'll be bringing back Dalvin Cook next year. Obviously, Thielen and Rudolph and Diggs have been really good passing game weapons. So it's a good team, solid foundation. Having to figure out quarterback isn't ideal, but they do have some options right there in the franchise tag to use. And then from there, you go about building your plan going forward. I appreciate you guys coming out. Please give me all your feedback. We want to hear what you guys like about this, what you like about the ones we do on Friday. Again, you can get at me on my Twitter page at Albert Breer. You can get at me on my Facebook page at Albert R. Breer. I have made a habit the last couple of weeks of answering questions from there on the podcast. Let's look at doing that again next week. If you guys want, you can like my Facebook page, and then you can actually send a message right to me, which I will get, and answer those questions here later. And if you have any comment, again, on what you think we can do better, do it there. Do it on Twitter. Just get to me wherever you can. We want to make this a better experience for all of you guys as we get deeper into the playoffs. Of course, we're here today. We're going to be in Mobile in 2 weeks at the Senior Bowl. We're going to be on site at the Super Bowl in 3 weeks. And so just give us more. The more feedback you guys give us on where we should take this, the better we'll make the shows that we're doing on site from those places. Appreciate you guys coming out. Always remember to listen to the MMQB 10 Things podcast, the MMQB podcast with Peter King, and one more time this podcast, the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer. You can get us both a YouTube version on Tuesday and then, again, the traditional version on Friday. And you can look for us on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, wherever you guys get your podcasts. Same time next week. We'll be looking forward to the conference championship games. We'll probably have a few more coaches in place. We'll be reacting to all of it. We'll see you guys then.